Hello and welcome to the show. It's great to have you here with me today. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you're trying your best, really trying, to understand what a native English speaker is saying, but the words just seem to fly past you? Or maybe you're in a cafe, wanting to order a coffee, and suddenly, the simple English words you learned in class just disappear from your mind. You know what you want to say, but the words get stuck. And what about watching movies or TV shows in English? Do you find yourself always, and I mean always, needing those subtitles? If you nodded your head to any of that, or even let out a little sigh of, "Yes, that's me," then you are absolutely in the right place. You're not alone in this. So many English learners, even those who have studied for years, face these exact same challenges. It can be really frustrating, can't it? You put in the hours, you learn the grammar rules, you memorize vocabulary lists, but when it comes to real-life English, it feels like something is missing. Well, today we're going to change that. We're going to dive deep, really get to the bottom of why these common problems happen. Why is listening so hard sometimes? Why does speaking feel so scary? And why do those new words keep running away from our memory? More importantly, we're not just going to talk about the problems. Oh no, we're going to talk about solutions. Real, practical things you can start doing today to make a change. And I promise, by the end of our chat today, you'll have a much clearer idea of how to tackle these challenges head-on. So grab a cup of tea or coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started on this journey to better English. All right, let's tackle our first big, and I mean big, challenge for many English learners: listening comprehension. That's just a fancy way of saying understanding what you hear in English. So many learners tell me, "I can read English pretty well, but when someone speaks, I just get lost." Why does this happen? Let's break it down. Pain point 1. Listening comprehension difficulties. Why can't I ever understand? First, let's think about those specific situations where listening feels like climbing a mountain. You know the feeling, right? Native speakers can talk so fast. It feels like they're speaking at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and you're just trying to catch 1 or 2 words. It's like trying to read a book when someone is flipping the pages way too quickly. That's a really common one, this speed problem. And then there's how words get squished together. You might know a lot of individual words. You see what are you doing written down, and you understand them perfectly. But when a native speaker says it, it can sound more like what should-oin. This happens because of something called connected speech. Native speakers often link words together, change sounds, or even drop sounds to speak more smoothly and quickly. For instance, going to often becomes gonna, or want to becomes wanna. These aren't new words. They are just how words sound when they are spoken naturally and quickly in a sentence. We also have what we call weak forms. These are small grammar words like an, of, or can, when it's not stressed, that are pronounced very softly and quickly, almost like a little whisper. So, if you're expecting to hear every single word perfectly clearly, like in a textbook recording, real spoken English can be quite a shock. Another tricky part is the difference between understanding words and understanding the actual meaning. Sometimes, you might hear all the individual words in a sentence. You recognize them, but you still don't understand what the speaker really means. It's like having all the pieces of a puzzle, but you can't see the final picture. This can happen if you're too focused on each individual word and not listening for the main idea or the overall message. And background noise, this is a tough one. Trying to understand English in a quiet room is one thing. But what about in a busy cafe, on a noisy train, or at a lively party? All that extra sound can make it super difficult to focus on the English conversation. Your brain has to work much harder to filter out all that other noise and catch the important words. So, those are some pretty common experiences. Now, the big question is, why do these things happen? What are the reasons behind these listening difficulties? Well, a major factor is often not enough real-life listening. Many learners spend a lot of time listening to very clear, slow English, perhaps from their teachers or in language learning apps. And that's good for beginners, it really is. But it's not how people speak in real life, day to day. If you only listen to that kind of perfect English, you won't be prepared for the actual speed, the different accents, and all the connected speech you hear in everyday conversations. You really need to expose your ears to a variety of real English. Another reason is simply not knowing about these sound changes. As we mentioned, things like connected speech, weak forms, and elision, that's where sounds are missed out, like the T in next T day, often isn't fully pronounced, are completely normal in spoken English. If you don't know these rules of how sounds change and connect, you'll probably always be a bit confused. You might be listening for sounds that aren't actually there, or you won't recognize words when they are linked together in a stream of sound. Of course, vocabulary gaps or misunderstandings can also make listening hard. If you don't know enough words, that's an obvious barrier. But it's not just about the sheer number of words. Sometimes a single word can have many different meanings. Take the word get, for example. You can get a present, which means receive, you can get tired, which means become, you can get to the station, which means arrive, or you can get the joke, which means understand. If you only know one meaning of a common word like that, you might easily misunderstand entire sentences. And then, there's the issue of relying too much on subtitles. Subtitles can be really helpful, especially when you're just starting out. But if you always use subtitles, whether in your own language or even in English, your listening skills might not improve as much as they could. It's a bit like using crutches when you're trying to learn to walk on your own. Your ears need that practice, that challenge of trying to understand without the visual help. Your listening muscles really need a good workout. Finally, sometimes it's about missing cultural clues. Understanding isn't always just about the words themselves. It's also about the culture behind them. Jokes, references to famous people or events that you might not know, or common ways of saying things, idioms, for example, can be very confusing if you don't have the cultural background knowledge. For instance, if someone says, It's raining cats and dogs. They don't actually mean animals are falling from the sky. They just mean it's raining very, very heavily. Okay, that might sound like a lot of problems. But please don't feel discouraged. Understanding why something is difficult is always the first step to fixing it. Now, let's talk about what you can actually do. Let's focus on some psychological preparation and practical tips. First, let's consider your mindset, how you think about listening. It's so important to tell yourself, it's okay not to understand everything. Seriously. Even native speakers sometimes miss words or misunderstand things, especially if there's a lot of noise or if the speaker has a particularly strong or unfamiliar accent. So, relax. It's a normal part of communication. Don't panic if you miss a word or even a whole sentence. Try to see it as a chance to learn, not as a failure. Another key mindset shift is don't try to catch every single word. This is a really big mistake many learners make. They try to understand 100% of what they hear, every single detail. This is incredibly tiring and often completely impossible. Instead, try to get the main idea. What is the speaker generally talking about? What is their main point? It's like looking at a whole forest, not just focusing on one individual tree. Now for some practical techniques you can use to boost those listening skills. A great approach is to mix it up with both intensive and extensive listening. Extensive listening is all about listening for pleasure and general understanding. You should choose something you genuinely enjoy. Maybe it's a podcast about your hobbies, an audiobook in a genre you like, or some English songs you can sing along to. The key here is not to worry about understanding every single word. Just listen, relax, and try to follow the general story or topic. Do this as much as possible. The more you listen in this relaxed way, the more familiar your ears will become with the natural sounds and rhythm of English. Then there's intensive listening. This is when you listen very, very carefully to a short piece of audio, maybe just 1 or 2 minutes long. You listen to it many times. The first time, just listen. Then, perhaps listen again and try to write down what you hear. This is a technique called dictation. After that, listen with a transcript. That's the written version of the audio, and check your understanding. As you do this, pay close attention to any new words, how words are pronounced, and especially how words are linked together. This really helps you notice the important details of spoken English. A good way to start with intensive listening, particularly for getting used to connected speech, is a simple form of shadowing. Shadowing means listening to a short phrase or sentence and then trying to say it exactly like the speaker, either at the same time or immediately after them. You try to copy their pronunciation, their rhythm, and their intonation. That's the music of the voice. At first, you can do this with the transcript in front of you. It's a fantastic way to help your mouth and your ears work together. It's also really important to choose the right materials for your level. This is often called graded listening. Don't try to listen to very difficult things too soon. It will just make you frustrated and want to give up. Start with materials that are at your current B1 level or perhaps just a little bit challenging. There are so many great resources out there for B1 learners. You can find podcasts specifically made for English learners. These often have speakers who speak more clearly and explain difficult words. Graded readers with audio are also excellent. These are books written in simpler English, and they usually come with an audio recording so you can read and listen at the same time. You can also look for news for learners. Some news websites offer stories in simpler English with accompanying audio. And don't forget TV shows or cartoons designed for older children or teenagers. These often use clearer language than shows made for adults. As you get better and more confident, you can gradually move on to more challenging materials. Another very useful tip is to actively learn about those sound changes, the phonetic phenomena we talked about. Make an effort to learn about connected speech, weak forms, and common contractions like I'm, you're, and he's. There are many videos and websites that explain these concepts clearly. When you know what to listen for, it becomes much easier to recognize these patterns when you hear them in fast speech. For example, learning that did you often sounds like didja, or could you sounds like coulda, can make a big difference. And finally, make sure you build your vocabulary actively, especially for specific situations. When you learn new words, don't just learn the word and its translation. Try to learn how it's used in a sentence. Focus on learning words that are commonly used in situations you encounter frequently. For example, if you often need to order food in English, learn vocabulary related to restaurants, different types of food, and the phrases used for ordering. If you have business meetings in English, then focus on business English vocabulary. This makes it much easier to predict what kind of words you might hear in those particular situations, and that helps your comprehension. Phew, that was a lot about listening, I know. But remember, improving your listening skills takes time and consistent practice. Be patient with yourself. Every little bit of listening you do really does help. Okay, team, let's move on to our second major challenge, the one that can make your palms sweat and your heart beat faster. Speaking English. You've got the words in your head, you know the grammar mostly. But when it's time to actually say something, poof, it all disappears, or you get so nervous you can barely speak. Why is speaking so tough, and what can we do about it? Pain point 2, oral expression not fluent. Why do I get nervous stuck when I try to speak? Let's look at how this problem often shows up for learners. Many people find they have lots to say, but they just can't make the sentences come out right. You have great ideas, interesting opinions, or funny stories you want to share. But when you try to put them into English sentences, it feels like you're trying to build a house without any tools. The words don't come out in the right order, or you can't seem to find the right grammar structure. Then there's the fear of mistakes, and this is a huge one for so many learners. You're so worried about saying something wrong, maybe using the wrong verb tense, mispronouncing a word, or making a silly grammar mistake, that you just decide it's safer not to say anything at all. Or, if you do speak, you say very little and you speak very, very carefully, which doesn't feel natural. Another common issue is what some people call Chinglish or your native language-ish English. This happens when you think in your native language and then try to translate word for word directly into English. The result? Sentences that might be grammatically okay on the surface, but they sound very unnatural or are quite difficult for native English speakers to understand. For example, in some languages, you might say something like, "I have 30 years to express your age." But in English, we say, "I am 30 years old." Direct translation often just doesn't work smoothly. And, of course, there are pronunciation worries. You're not sure if you're saying words correctly. Maybe people have misunderstood you in the past because of your pronunciation, and that can make you feel very self-conscious and much less willing to speak. It definitely affects your confidence and sometimes how well others can actually understand what you're trying to say. So, these are common feelings and situations. Now, let's think about why these speaking challenges happen. Probably the biggest reason is simply not enough practice, or a lack of opportunities and a comfortable environment to practice in. You can't learn to swim by just reading a book about swimming. You actually have to get in the water and try. It's exactly the same with speaking a language. If you don't regularly practice speaking English, your speaking skills just won't improve. Many learners don't have enough opportunities to speak, or they don't feel comfortable or safe enough to speak in their current environment. Another factor can be focusing too much on grammar and not enough on fluency. When you're in a conversation, if you're constantly thinking, "Is this grammar correct? Is this the perfect word to use here?" you will inevitably speak very slowly and hesitantly. While grammar is certainly important for effective communication, fluency, which means speaking smoothly and naturally, is often more important, especially when you're at the B1 level. Sometimes the problem is slow word recall. You know the word, it's somewhere in your brain, you can feel it, but you just can't find it quickly enough when you're in the middle of a conversation. This tip of the tongue feeling is incredibly frustrating and really breaks the flow of your speech. As we mentioned earlier, thinking in your native language and translating directly is a common pitfall. Good speakers, over time, learn to think more directly in English, or at least they learn to use common English patterns and phrases without translating. And finally, not having a systematic approach to pronunciation can hold you back. If you've never really learned how English sounds are made or the rules for word stress, which syllable to emphasize and sentence intonation, the melody of the sentence, your pronunciation might be inconsistent. This isn't about having a perfect, native-like accent. Everyone has an accent, and that's fine. But it is about being clear and understandable to others. All right, again, knowing the reasons helps us find the solutions. So, what can we do to become more confident and fluent speakers? Let's look at some psychological tips and practical strategies. First, let's talk about your mindset for speaking. You need to start telling yourself, "Mistakes are my friends." Okay, maybe not your best friends, but they are a natural and absolutely necessary part of learning any new skill. Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning. If you're not making mistakes, you're probably not trying enough new things or pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So, try to see mistakes as valuable learning opportunities, not as failures. If you can, try to laugh about them. Another important mindset is fluency first, accuracy later, especially at the start. When you're practicing speaking, especially in the beginning, focus more on getting your message across and speaking smoothly. Don't stop every few seconds to correct yourself or worry about perfect grammar. You can work on accuracy at other times, maybe when you're writing or doing specific grammar exercises. In a real conversation, the main goal is communication, making yourself understood. Now for some practical techniques to get you talking more. One of the best things you can do is to create your own speaking opportunities. You don't always need a native speaker to practice with, although that's great if you have the chance. You can talk to yourself. Yes, really. Describe what you're doing throughout the day, what you see around you, or what you're thinking about, all in English. You can do it in the shower, while you're cooking, or when you're out for a walk. It might feel a little silly at first, but it's fantastic practice for forming sentences and getting your thoughts out in English. Another great idea is to record yourself speaking. Use your phone, it's easy. You could read a short text aloud, answer some questions you prepare for yourself, or just talk about your day. Then, listen back to the recording. You'll notice things about your pronunciation, your grammar, and your fluency that you can then work on. It's like being your own personal language coach. You can also try to find a language partner. Look for other learners who also want to practice speaking. You can find them online through language exchange websites or apps, or maybe in your local community. You can help each other and practice in a relaxed, supportive way. Or, if it's possible for you, find a tutor or join an English conversation class. It's also incredibly helpful to learn and use common phrases and sentence starters. Don't try to invent every single sentence from scratch every time you speak. Native speakers use a lot of fixed phrases and common patterns in their everyday conversation. Learn these. For example, for giving opinions, you can use phrases like, "I think that," "in my opinion," or "it seems to me that." For agreeing or disagreeing, you can use, "I agree, that's true, I'm not so sure about that," or "I see your point, but," and for asking for clarification, phrases like, "Could you say that again, please? What does that mean?" Or "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that," are essential. Knowing these will make your speech sound more natural and will also give you a little more time to think about your ideas. And don't forget to practice pronunciation deliberately. Don't just hope your pronunciation will get better on its own. You need to actively work on it. Focus on individual sounds that are difficult for you. Maybe it's the TH sound, or R, or L, or perhaps certain vowel sounds that don't exist in your native language. Watch videos that show how to make these sounds with your mouth, your tongue, and your lips. Practice them regularly, even for just a few minutes each day. Also, pay attention to word stress. In English, one syllable in a word is usually stressed, meaning it's spoken a bit louder and longer more than the others. For example, in the word photograph, the stress is on the first syllable. But in photographer, it's on the second, and in photographic, it's on the third. Using the wrong stress can sometimes make words hard to understand. You can use a good learner's dictionary to check the stress patterns of new words. And then there's sentence stress and intonation. In a sentence, some words are more important and are stressed more than others. Intonation is the music of the sentence, how your voice goes up and down. Listen carefully to native speakers and try to copy their rhythm and intonation. This will make your English sound much more natural and engaging. Finally, try to think in chunks of language, not just single words. Instead of translating word by word from your native language, try to learn and use common chunks of English. These are groups of words that often go together naturally. For example, instead of thinking, "I want to go to the park" as 5 separate words, think of "go to the park" as one single chunk. Other examples are "have a good time," "look forward to," or "on the other hand." Learning and using these chunks helps you speak more fluently and sound much more natural. Speaking is a skill, and just like any other skill, it improves with practice. The more you speak, even if you make mistakes along the way, the better and more confident you will become. So take a deep breath, be brave, and start speaking. We've talked about listening, we've talked about speaking. Now let's address another common frustration: vocabulary. Specifically, that feeling of "I learn new words, but then they just vanish from my brain." Or, you know a word, but you can't quite use it correctly when you're trying to speak or write. Sound familiar? Let's unpack this. Pain point 3. Insufficient vocabulary/memory difficulty. What if I keep forgetting words? First, how does this problem usually show up for learners? Well, one common experience is encountering reading and listening roadblocks. You're reading an interesting article or listening to a podcast, and suddenly, a word you don't know stops you in your tracks. You lose the flow of what you're reading or hearing, and it becomes hard to understand the rest of the sentence or paragraph. Another way this shows up is through speaking and writing gaps. You want to express a specific idea, maybe something quite precise, but you just can't find the right word. You might end up using a simpler, less precise word, or you might just get stuck and feel frustrated. Your communication isn't as clear or as rich as you'd like it to be. And then there's that classic, "I know I learned that word" feeling. This is so common. You see a word and you have a vague memory of having learned it before, but you can't remember exactly what it means or how to use it. It's like the word is playing hide and seek in your brain, and it's very frustrating. So, why is it so hard to remember and use new vocabulary effectively? A big reason is learning words in isolation. Many learners try to memorize long lists of words with their direct translations. For example, apple manzana, book libro, happy fellas. While knowing the translation is a start, learning words this way, completely without any context, makes them very hard to remember in the long term and even harder to use correctly in your own sentences. Words rarely live alone. They live in sentences and situations connected to other words. This leads to another point, a lack of context. If you don't see or hear how a word is actually used in real sentences, with other words around it, you won't understand its full meaning or how to use it grammatically. Think about the word run. You can run a race. A computer can run a program. Your nose can run if you have a cold, or you can run a company. The context is what tells you which meaning is intended. Without that context, a word is just an abstract symbol. Sometimes, the issue is using wrong memorization methods, especially rote memorization. Just reading a word and its definition over and over again, this is what rote memorization is often not very effective for long-term memory. Our brains tend to remember things much better when they are meaningful, when they are connected to other things we already know, or when we interact with them actively in some way. Of course, not enough repetition and review plays a huge part. Seeing a new word once or twice is usually not enough to make it stick in your memory. We need to encounter new words multiple times, in different contexts, over a period of time. If you don't review what you've learned, you'll naturally forget a lot of it. There's even a name for this: the forgetting curve. Finally, it's important to understand the difference between passive and active vocabulary. We all have these two types of vocabulary. Your passive vocabulary includes all the words that you recognize when you read or hear them, but you don't necessarily use them when you speak or write yourself. Your active vocabulary, on the other hand, includes the words that you can recall easily and use confidently and correctly in your own speaking and writing. The goal for learners is to move more words from their passive vocabulary into their active vocabulary. Just memorizing lists often only builds passive vocabulary, which isn't as useful for communication. Okay, so learning vocabulary isn't just about memorizing lists. It's about making connections and actually using the words. What can we do to make vocabulary learning more effective and less frustrating? Let's look at some mindset shifts and practical strategies. First, your mindset for learning vocabulary. Try not to treat vocabulary like a punishment. Learning new words shouldn't feel like a boring chore or a difficult task. Try to find ways to make it interesting and relevant to your own life. Think of it as collecting valuable tools that will help you express yourself better and understand the world more deeply. And always remember this: context is king and queen. Always, always, always try to learn and remember words in context. A word is like a person. You get to know it much better when you see it with its friends, which are other words in its natural neighborhood, which is a sentence or a situation. Now for some practical techniques to help those words stick in your mind. One of the best approaches is to learn words from context. When you read or listen to something in English, pay close attention to any new words you encounter. Before you rush to the dictionary, try to guess their meaning from the surrounding words and the overall topic. This is a great skill to develop, and it makes learning more active. Then, of course, look up the word in a good learner's dictionary. These dictionaries are specially made for learners and give simple definitions and, very importantly, example sentences. Don't just look at the first definition. See if there are other common meanings listed. And crucially, look at those example sentences. How is the word used? What prepositions often go with it? For example, we say depend on or interested in. Is it a noun, a verb, an adjective? All this information is vital. Another powerful strategy is to make meaningful connections with new words. Try to connect new words to what you already know. Does the new word relate to your hobbies, your job, your personal life? For example, if you learn the word efficient and you work in an office, think about specific ways you can be more efficient in your daily tasks. You can also use word association. Does the new word sound like a word in your own language? Can you create a funny image or a short story in your mind to help you remember it? For example, if you're learning the word enormous, which means very, very big, you could imagine an enormous mouse. That unusual and slightly silly combination might help the word stick in your memory. It's also very effective to learn word families. When you learn a word like beauty, which is a noun, also try to learn related words like beautiful, which is an adjective, and beautify, which is a verb. This expands your vocabulary much faster than learning single words one by one. You should also use active learning techniques. One of the best ways to make a new word your own is to create your own example sentences using it. Try to use the new word in a sentence that is true or meaningful for you personally. This makes the word much more memorable. You can also use flashcards, but make them smart flashcards. Don't just put the English word on one side and the translation on the other. That's too passive. Instead, add an example sentence, maybe a small picture or a drawing, or a note about how the word is used. You can use physical flashcards that you make yourself, or you can use digital flashcard apps like Anki or Quizlet, which often use a system called spaced repetition. This means they show you words just before you're likely to forget them, which is very efficient for learning. It's also a great idea to keep a vocabulary notebook. When you learn a new word, write it down with its meaning. An example sentence that you like or create may be a synonym, a word with a similar meaning or an antonym, a word with the opposite meaning, and any other useful notes about its usage. And, of course, you need to review regularly. Don't just learn a word once and then forget about it. You need to come back to it. Look back at your vocabulary notebook or your flashcards regularly. Try to actively use the new words you've learned when you speak or write. The more you use a word in real communication, the better you'll remember it. Finally, one of the most natural and enjoyable ways to build your vocabulary is to read and listen widely. The more you read and listen to English in different contexts, books, articles, podcasts, movies, anything you find interesting, the more you will naturally encounter new words and see familiar words used in new and different ways. This is a fantastic way to build your vocabulary almost without trying too hard, just by engaging with the language. Building a strong vocabulary is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time and consistent effort. Be patient with yourself, be curious about words, and try to make learning new vocabulary an enjoyable part of your English journey. Every new word you learn opens up a new way for you to understand the world and to express yourself. So, we've talked a lot today, haven't we? We've looked at the big challenges of listening, speaking, and vocabulary. We've explored why these things can be so tricky, and most importantly, we've shared some real, practical strategies and mindset shifts that you can start using right away to make a difference in your English learning. The main message I want you to take away is this: you are not alone in these struggles, and there are effective ways to overcome them. It's all about understanding the root of the problem and then applying targeted solutions. It's not about just studying harder, it's about studying smarter. It's about being kind to yourself, celebrating small victories, and being consistent with your practice. And this is where I'd love to tell you a little bit about my channel, Elephant English. You see, everything we've discussed today, the difficulties with listening to fast speech and connected words, the nervousness about speaking and making mistakes, the challenge of remembering and using new vocabulary, these are exactly the kinds of things we focus on at Elephant English. My goal with Elephant English is to provide you with clear explanations, practical exercises, and lots of encouragement, specifically designed for learners like you, learners who are at that B1 level and are ready to break through to the next stage. On the Elephant English channel, you'll find videos that break down those tricky listening bits with real-life examples. We have sessions that guide you through pronunciation practice in a fun and easy way, helping you build that speaking confidence. We explore vocabulary in context, giving you techniques to make those new words stick and become part of your active, everyday English. Think of Elephant English as your friendly guide and supportive community on your path to English fluency. We believe that learning English should be an enjoyable and rewarding experience, not a frustrating one. So, if you're tired of feeling stuck, if you're ready to really understand native speakers, to speak more confidently, and to build a vocabulary that you can actually use, then I warmly invite you to check out Elephant English. Subscribe to the channel, explore the videos, and join our community of learners. Let's tackle these English challenges together. I truly believe that with the right approach and consistent effort, you can achieve your English goals. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope you found it helpful and inspiring. Keep practicing, keep learning, and never give up on your English journey. Until next time, take care and happy learning.